Welcome back to the Illinois Coalition of Local Governments webinar series on the Cannabis Regulation and Tax Act. This is the last video in the series. So far, we have looked at the background of the Cannabis Regulation and Tax Act, the cannabis industry in Illinois, personal use and possession, state regulation of the industry, local control, and state and local tax revenues. This video will focus on other provisions held within the Cannabis Regulation or Tax Act, also known as the CRTA, that concern issues such as consumer protections, cannabis in the workplace, criminal records expungement, and potential effects for our local first responders. From a consumer protection standpoint, the CRTA included specific limitations for both advertising and packaging of cannabis products. As far as advertising cannabis products, no cannabis business establishment or person may engage in any advertising that contains statements or illustrations that are false or misleading, promote overconsumption, depict a person using cannabis, or something that would likely appeal to a minor. Furthermore, no cannabis business or person may advertise any cannabis or cannabis product in any form within 1,000 feet of the perimeter of a school playground, a recreational center, a child care center, a public park, a public library, a game arcade that's open to minors, public transit, or public place. Packaging regulations, on the other hand, also strictly require that all cannabis products include a warning label that state that the use of the product is intended for adults 21 and older, and that use of the product can impair cognition and be habit forming. Packaging of any products containing cannabis shall be child resistant and light resistant and consistent with current standards such as those set forth by the Consumer Product Safety Commission. The label of each cannabis product shall contain, among other things, a use-by date on the label, the quantity of the cannabis contained in the product, a content list. Packaging also cannot contain anything false or misleading, depict usage, or appeal to minors. Turning to a topic of great significance to local units of government who are also major employers is the issue of cannabis in the workplace. Both private and public sector employers have to determine how to manage their employees and cannabis use in the workplace. The CRTA specifically provides that employers may adopt and enforce reasonable policies related to drug use, drug testing, smoking, consumption, or storage of cannabis in the workplace or while on call. This includes allowing employers to have reasonable zero-tolerance policies or drug-free workplace policies. There was some ambiguity in the CRTA as originally adopted relating to workplace rights. However, those were addressed in subsequent legislation. There are still some lingering uncertainties about how the CRTA interacts with the Privacy in the Workplace Act. Nevertheless, as an employer, local units of government are encouraged to revisit their employment policies and practices as it relates to drug use and consult with legal counsel on the best way to move forward related to these issues. One prominent element of the CRTA in its effort to achieve social equity was that it included criminal record expungement language. As a preliminary matter, it's important to note that criminal offenses still exist for the unlawful possession of cannabis. This means that if you are in possession of amounts excessive of legal limits, or if you obtain the cannabis from illegal sources, you may still face criminal penalties. That being said, there are a number of individuals in the state of Illinois who have current criminal arrest records for conduct that is now currently legalized by the Act. For many people, especially those in the brown and black communities who are especially targeted by the war on drugs, old arrests and convictions for minor cannabis possession charges still haunt them when they fill out job applications or seek housing or related matters. It is estimated that at least 700,000 people in Illinois with minor records for cannabis will be eligible for expungement under the new provisions of the Cannabis Regulation and Tax Act. This was in an effort to undo some of the harm caused by the war on drugs. As such, the CRTA requires that local law enforcement and the Illinois State Police automatically expunge arrests not leading to conviction for possession of cannabis or possession with the intent to deliver cannabis under 30 grams. The Act also creates a clemency process be established for convictions up to 30 grams that the governor's office will direct. And then for those larger convictions for possession of 30 to 500 grams, a state's attorney or an individual can petition a court to vacate that conviction. Illinois was the first state in the nation to include expungement language within their legislation legalizing cannabis. At a local level, this is important both because local law enforcement will have to work with Illinois State Police towards these expungement efforts, but also because local units of government may need to revise their municipal codes as it relates to local possession regulations. Our final topic of discussion is also of particular interest to local units of government, and that is the impact legalization of recreational cannabis could have on our first responders, those such as law enforcement, fire department personnel, and healthcare workers. With legalization of recreational cannabis, it's possible that local units of government will see an increased need for services related to overconsumption, public intoxication, substance abuse, or adolescent use. While there are conflicting studies and reports about what the actual effect of legalization will be, the state of Illinois was proactive in the CRTA to ensure that there was funding to supply greater resources to first responders to address these potential needs. This will include allocating 20% of the revenue generated by the sale of cannabis to support efforts to address substance abuse and prevention and mental health. 8% of tax revenue will be transferred to the local government distributive fund to support crime prevention training programs, training and interdiction efforts, and 2% will be transferred to the drug treatment fund to fund public education campaign and to support data collection and analysis of the public health impacts of legalizing recreational cannabis. The Department of Revenue estimates that the state will bring in over $140 million in sales tax revenue for fiscal year 2021. Therefore, these additional revenues might be significant in helping reduce any adverse effects we may see from recreational cannabis. Another concern specific to law enforcement is the ability to test for impairment caused by cannabis. Unlike alcohol, there is no widely accepted mechanism for testing cannabis impairment. There are current drug tests for cannabis. However, these drug tests can produce a positive result even if the individual consumed the cannabis days, weeks, or even months prior and are not still under the influence of the drug. However, Illinois is not alone in this effort. There are other states and organizations throughout the country trying to resolve this matter. In an effort to identify emerging and best practices, the CRTA created the DUI Cannabis Task Force. The task force will be chaired by the director of the Illinois State Police, and the task force will examine best practices in the area of driving under the influence of cannabis enforcement, including examining emerging technology and roadside testing. The task force will submit its report and recommendations to the governor and the General Assembly for further consideration. Through this increase in funding and awareness, we are hopeful that legalization will have a minimal adverse impact on local units of governments and our communities. We hope you enjoyed this web series and found it informative. The Illinois Coalition of Local Governments would like to thank the Delgado Law Group for their assistance in producing this series. For more information on any of the topics discussed, please visit illinoislocalgov.org.